No brand is ever going to be relevant and loved by everyone. And that's okay, right? So the game is really won and lost by understanding who specifically you want to serve.
Hello and welcome to Minter Dialogue, episode number 330. Today is Sunday the 2nd of June 2019. And just a quick announcement that my new book, Artificial Empathy, Putting Heart into Business and AI, is now out as an audiobook, available on Amazon or Audible, of course also still as a Kindle or paperback. For today's show, I have Mitch Duckler. Mitch is managing partner of brand and marketing strategy consultancy called FullSurge, who has also spent many years working brand management in blue chip companies such as Unilever and Coca-Cola. He's the author of a brand new book, The Indispensable Brand, Move from Invisible to Invaluable. In this conversation, we of course focus on branding, how brands can stand out and avoid what Mitch calls brand monotony, the power of purpose and brand personality, and the importance of employees as touchpoints for the brand. Welcome to the Minter Dialogue podcast, where we discuss branding and all things digital. I am Minter Dial, your host, and you'll find the show notes on my eponymous site, minterdial.com. Enjoy the show. Mitch Duckler, it's great to have you on the show. You are, as I understand, based outside of Chicago. You run a FullSurge strategy consultancy, and you just recently published The Indispensable Brand, Move from Invisible to Invaluable. So Mitch, in your own words, how do you describe yourself?
Well, I would like to describe myself as indispensable, hopefully as a consultant.
Good luck.
Exactly. No, but I am a brand and marketing strategy consultant. So really what I do on a day in, day out basis is I help clients build very strong brands individually and collectively as a portfolio. And that's really the premise behind the book that you just referenced a moment ago, is how do you kind of break through this, whatever you want to call, sea of sameness, brand monotony, as I refer to it in the book, and move from what I would consider to be a state in which brands are becoming invisible, and in other words, virtually indistinguishable from one another within a category, to highly invaluable and even indispensable brands that your customers cannot live without. And that's really the end goal, I think, of a brand manager.
So Mitch, what on earth made you want to have that tortuous process of writing and publishing a book?
Well, it's there are a few things. One is I do believe, just having been in brand my entire career, I do believe that this is a bit of a crisis, and it has been getting worse. So it's just philosophically, it is something that I believe strongly in, and then pragmatically being a brand consultant, right, being in the professional services arena. A brand strategist, it's something that's very important for my career, to be honest, and for our firm to be able to demonstrate our thought leadership, to use our platform as a means to demonstrate our thinking, as well as generate new business and clients and so forth. So it's really twofold.
Yes, in the end of the day, in the indispensable brand is also about making the indispensable consultancy,
Exactly.
making you stand out.
Exactly. That's why I led with that. Exactly.
So you're a consultant, but you also have a past working in industry and in the real life. So tell us about what your past was that led you before you were launching FullSurge.
Sure. I like to tell clients very often that I have the benefit of two worlds. I've sat in their shoes, right? I've been a brand manager, a director of marketing. I've owned P&Ls. And I think that's very important for them to know that. There's nothing wrong with being a lifelong consultant. There are very many, and many do it very well. But I do think I have a unique perspective, having spent about 10 years or so working as a brand manager or in brand management with world-class companies like Unilever and like Coca-Cola. and I just think it gives me a very unique perspective to understand, what it's like to live in their shoes and like I said, own P&Ls and write through your strategic plans, not necessarily just flip from one engagement to the next.
That's so true, and I subscribe to the same idea, Mitch, because you, like I, also worked in industry, and on top of that, we
Yes.
worked also in the same type of industry.
Yeah,
So
we did.
what I loved about your book, and one of the things the notions that I really just fully, like right, brand monotony. So brand monotony, and this notion that they just don't stand out. They're much of the
Yeah.
muchness. How did we get so much monotony in the first place? So how has this come around?
Yeah. So in the book, I write about, and I won't go into too much detail, there's an entire chapter on it in there, but I write about 7 factors that have led to the current state of brand monotony. One is changes in technology. That's obvious, like we're digital activation, the internet, the World Wide Web, social media have really kind of changed the playing field, if you will, in brand and marketing. Proliferation of choice. There's more choice than ever before in any given category, and more categories and industries for that matter than ever before. There have been changes to distribution, especially changes in power from manufacturer to retailer to consumer. Communications and messaging have changed radically. When I started out in brand management, when brand management launched, there were three national broadcast networks in the United States, ABC, NBC, and CBS, and now we've got cable television and satellite and DVR. The amount of information that's available. Net, what that means is there has been a transfer of power in the commercial equation from manufacturers to consumers. I'm not saying it was easy to be a brand manager back in the 60s and 70s and 80s, but I think it was a lot less challenging. There was a lot more control. You made your 30-second ad and you ran it on one of 3 network television stations and your brand was positioned. Not so anymore. And I think because of that, there has been a bit of a backlash, and I think marketers have shifted to more of a mindset of copy, right, and imitate as opposed to really differentiate and innovate.
Huh. So in the end of the day, what it makes me think is that maybe there wasn't so much differentiation in the past because it wasn't as visible, because there wasn't so many opportunities, the distribution wasn't there. And my detergent does white, mine does really white, and that was sufficient in the past. Whereas now there's sort of a level of transparency on the ingredients, on the messaging, because you could also say with so many channels of distribution for communicating, the message gets completely diffused, and it's harder to pick up on what is each brand.
Yes. And access to information is another, right? So way back in the day, market research was in the domain of the privileged, right? It was very, very expensive, and few companies could do it to really understand consumers and what their needs are and how to position their brand. Now, anyone can do it, right? There are so many ways that startups can understand consumer needs and understand perceptions and attitudes and have access to the type of insights that were once privileged to the IBMs and Procter and Gambles of the world. So with all of that, everybody's got the same amount of information and access to it, and it's kind of a leveling of the playing field, or as Friedman said, the world is flat. And I think that's part of what is resulting in the monotony that we're seeing.
All right, so in this flat world where nothing stands out, then how do you construct a brand that is going to stand out? What are the key pillars for making that happen?
Well, it all starts with positioning, as you know, and identifying the essence of your brand. What is it that makes it different? What is it that makes it better and special? And one of the things that I talk about in the book is that we as marketers need to think about positioning more expansively. So in the old days of back in like the recent Trout days of positioning, right, where the brand positioning statement was invented, the positioning was always based on a benefit, a consumer and benefit, right? And it was typically what I would call a what, right? It's what it does, what your brand, what your product does for its target audience. And that's valid, right? There's nothing to say that you can't or shouldn't do that. But I would argue that in many categories, including the one in which we're very familiar with, the what is almost generic or universal, right? So if you think about hair care, which we're both familiar with, at the end of the day, it's all about beautiful hair, right? And you're not going to differentiate or become differentiated based on talking about beautiful hair. But what have competitors done within the category? They talk about how they do it, right? It's vitamin infused, or it's conditioner that self-adjusts, or something like that. Your point of difference is about a how. So all of a sudden you start thinking about differentiation differently. It doesn't have to be a benefit. It can be a how or a process. And two other ways are why or who, right? Why is typically purpose branding, right? A lot of brand, that's all the rage now. The last 5 to 10 years. Simon Sinek, exactly. Start with the why. And that's about a brand is the very essence of it, its very reason for being is all about a purpose. So that's another opportunity to be differentiated. And then the final one is who, right? There are certain brands, especially lifestyle brands, that really define themselves based on the target that they serve. You know, Mountain Dew is a brand for extreme outdoor enthusiasts, young male gamer. Very often they're gamers. When you think about the Mountain Dew soft drink brand, a certain image comes into your mind of the user, and they've really defined their brand around their consumer, their advocates.
All right, so let's go, Mitch, with a legacy brand, a la Finesse, a la L'Oréal, Paris. When you're dealing with these huge brands that have millions of customers, that have a history in a P&L language of money that's come in the till, now Mitch goes out to them and says, you know what, you need to differentiate more. Your products are all the same. They've got a great silicon formula, la-di-da, wonderful, but you need to stand out in this flat world. How do you get a legacy brand like that has so many stakeholders, so much history to move and have some sort of Himalaya stand out in this flat world?
Yeah. Well, it's not easy. I think the first thing you need to do is understand that there's a certain amount of pragmatism involved here. And you know, when you talk about brands, like the types of brands that are owned by a L'Oreal, you're talking about, you know, hundreds of millions of dollars, right? And I don't want to be billions of dollars, exactly, yeah, and collectively, and you can't be a purist and say, you know what, you're not differentiated. And therefore you need to upset the apple cart. So I think very often it does start with building a business case, right? I think, and a lot of it is through, and we've done this with clients in the past, market research to understand your consumers, to segment your market, to understand which segments you need to target because they are the ones that are most profitable for you to serve. And then understand what their needs are, what their drivers of purchase and loyalty are, and the extent to which your brand aligns with those. And if you can make the case that repositioning your brand and every aspect of it, not just the positioning and the communication, but the product and service offering, the experience it offers, will actually drive greater levels of loyalty, then you have a business case. If not, then it's just an academic exercise.
Do you not get pushback with the clients you deal with? Well, you know, if I say this, it's going to piss off this group.
Yes. And my answer to that is good. Again, it goes back to, well, two things. It goes back to what the point I brought up earlier about segmentation, right? So no brand, I don't care what brand you are, even massive ubiquitous brands like Google and Starbucks, right? No brand is ever going to be relevant and loved by everyone. And that's okay, right? So the game is really won and lost by understanding, you know, who specifically you want to serve, right? And everybody else is all nice to have, right? Get your fair share. You've got to win exponentially with your target segment and get your fair share of everyone else. So yes, as you reposition your brand, you might alienate certain people, and that's okay as long as you know it is who you're serving and you win disproportionately with them.
In listening to you, Mitch, and I love the idea, you know, sparking new ideas. I almost have this idea of, you know, D'Artagnan. He gets his sword and he has it to your neck, and he says, but who would you like to piss off? Don't you find, in order for us to move the dial, we actually need to get that conversation going? Because otherwise it's too quickly, yeah, I really want to keep them as well.
Uh-huh. Uh-huh. Yeah, and I think I've had that conversation with clients frequently, and I think the way you talk about it is in a couple different ways. One is, and there's been a lot of research. I can't reference the exact studies, but there's been a lot of market research that has showed that brands that are polarizing, right? They really are beloved by some and hated by others. Are far outshine those that are just blasé to everyone. Which I think is
which you're talking about. That's the banal.
Yeah.
That's the monotonous
Monotony.
word. The blasé.
Exactly. You are better off, taking 20% of the market and building champions and loyalists out of those and pissing off the other 80% than just being mediocre to everyone. Exactly.
So how do you do that in a business where I still also account to the shareholder at the end of every quarter? Don't worry, everything is on track and blah blah blah. And yet, with moving the Titanic ship, which has got all these customers, and we might have little underrepresentation in certain customer groups. Yes, we want to have a somewhat smaller overrepresentation as other customer group, typically younger.
Yep.
And to go the apple cart route, which is what you do when you're pissing off people, especially when you've got the legal team breathing down your back. You can't see that.
Right. I don't know if it's ever good to piss off people, right? what I'm talking about is you build your brand around your zealots, right? The folks that are the most important to win with. And you don't fire everyone else, and you certainly don't deliberately try to piss them off, but you don't build your brand around them either. And what you'll find is you might get your fair share of them, or maybe not even, and that's okay, right? So it's not to say that you build. So I think a great example is in the airline industries. In the industry, what airlines have done is they've built their brands around their most loyal customers, right? They serve their frequent flyers, the ones that are most loyal and have the most status on their airlines. And they build every aspect of their offer, their experience to tailor and cater to them. That doesn't mean that everybody else, all those people that board when they call group 6 or 7, and they're the last 8 people to get on you're still going to get them, right?
Do you think
it's not like you're not going to, but you're not going to build your brand around them and design your offer in the essence of your positioning to serve them.
Right, great. I love this because obviously I travel a lot, and probably you do too.
Yes.
The group 1 of American, yes. The group 1 of United, and the group 1 of British Airways. How different are they really?
Yeah, they're not, to be honest. They're not as different. In fact, it is an example that they're all actually trying to cater to the same, right? The frequent business, non-cost sensitive flyer who wants to be pampered and spoiled, and who wants to be the million-mile flyer, et cetera. But I think you're absolutely right. I think I use the analogy when you're sitting on a plane. And I do this all the time. I know you do too. And I fly United, right? That's being in Chicago, right? Big surprise.
You don't have guitars.
Exactly. Being in United, Chicago. We're Chicago based, so that's my airline. But I sit on a plane and I look, and I couldn't tell you what airline I'm on, right? I take a look at the seats around me. I take a look at the overhead bins. I take a look at the cockpit, the flight attendants, the beverage cart. Everything. I think with maybe the exception of a Virgin or a few other airlines, you wouldn't know what airline you're flying that day. And I think that is unfortunately a great example of monotony.
Yeah, totally. And and when we get into cosmetics, is that we want to have younger and like the fashion conscious, fashion forward, and in the cosmetics world, that's the typical thing. And then when you go into outdoors, Patagonia, I want the wild adventurer, and they all have the sort of same group. And yet some of them manage to stand out, a la Virgin, because I think in that case they have some kind of of aura that Branson has stamped on
Branson.
it, and that element is differentiable, and makes you feel when you fly Virgin, you're a little bit Branson like.
Yes. Yes, I think that they're a great example of that. I think on the other end, here in the U.S., Southwest Airlines
Sure.
with Keller is very much the same. Those are the exceptions, right? A few that have, whether it's around the eccentricity of Branson, or the not taking yourself too seriously of a Southwest, they have found, those airlines have found a way to have a different point, and they reflect it in everything. Like, I love on Virgin their safety video, which is like watching a comedy show, right? And they do that not just because it's entertaining, but because it reflects their brand and
Yeah.
their persona.
Gary
Yeah,
Vaynerchuk did a video
yeah,
on LinkedIn where he said too many brands are still interested in commercials.
yeah,
You should think about the content between the commercials.
right.
And so while in so the ad here, you're talking about the safety advertisements, where you have to wear your seatbelt and all that. It is, let's say, a standard, you have to do it, but they make it feel like content versus
Yes,
commerce.
yes, and it's interesting because I think United has actually tried to imitate, to a certain extent, what Virgin has done, and it just falls flat. It's almost painful to watch because you can see what they're doing, and there's monotony in a different way, copycat, right?
Yeah, right. So,
And they just can't do it. They
right.
can't
So
pull it off. It's not their brand.
on the one hand, if you're dealing with an entrepreneur, Mitch, where you've got, you're fabricating it, you're making it yourself. Mitch is running it. I'm me, and I'm going to bring, full me to the plate. But when you're a legacy brand, this notion of breaking the monotony, especially when you have a portfolio of brands underneath you, becomes awfully difficult. And so while it might be in the nuance and you need to be pragmatic, and somehow I feel you need to break the glass, and you need to have that sort of cut, that sort of element of distinct personality, which originally came from the founder. Then you buy the company, the founder gets ejected 3 years later, and then you're left with some mercenary person running it that used to be on another brand. It's going to apply what they did to do there successfully on the new one, and next thing you know, you've got a monotonous brand.
Yes. Yeah, yeah. No, it's not easy. There's no doubt about it, and that's why I have a job as a
Exactly.
consultant. That's
That's
why
why
I
you
wrote a
and I
book.
have a job. All
We
right,
both
so
have jobs,
let's talk
exactly.
about purpose, because
Yeah.
you mentioned it a lot in your book.
hmm
How do you define purpose?
Well, the context within which I talk about purpose in the book is one of those four ways, right? To the why in this case, for defining a point of difference. So, um, I wouldn't say every brand, but certainly every company, and certainly all major companies have a purpose, right? I think, they all have a mission statement, and sometimes it's in their annual report or hanging on the headquarter walls, right? And that's fine. That's all well and fine, but that's not really what I'm talking about. It's one thing for a company to have a mission, especially a corporate brand to have a mission or a purpose. It's another to define your brand by it. And that's really what I talk about in the book. And we talk about, and actually you mentioned Patagonia earlier. That's a brand that I actually mentioned in the book. That and Tom Shoes, Patagonia, Warby Parker are examples of brands who don't just have a mission like a lot of companies, but it defines them. It's their very essence. And consumers or customers gravitate to them because of that purpose, almost despite their product and services. Those are secondary to these people.
So if it's one of the ways of differentiating yourself, that I take it to mean that it's not necessarily the only way, and not the one that should be applied to all companies.
Correct.
How do you decide whether purpose is something you should be doing? If you look at your options, I read this book, which ones
hmm
should I be jumping on? And because I tend to be purpose led
hmm
as an individual, and I feel like I need to sell it, but pull back my sails. Tell me who shouldn't be doing it.
Well, I think there's a couple of rules of thumb you can apply. I think one is you can't fake it, right? I think disingenuous purpose will fall flat. Maybe it'll be successful if you're lucky for a short period of time. Eventually, I think the market sees through that. So before you lead with purpose, I think you have to make sure that it's a true one, it's a powerful one. It really is the reason for being for your company or for your brand. If not, if it's just cliche, if it's just, you know what, that's the thing people do now, they define a purpose and that's their brand, I don't think it's going to succeed. But if it really is that powerful, I think that's a starter. And then the other is, I think, the other thing you need to do is, again, look at the other side of the equation and understand, well, it's all well and good to have a purpose, and I encourage it, but to what extent does it resonate in the market? Will you be able to find loyalists that can relate to that purpose, purchase your brand because of that purpose, remain loyal to you because of that purpose, right? Otherwise, you're as well-intentioned as you are, it's not going to be a good business move for you in the long run. So it's really a combination of both. Do you have that idea, that purpose that is true to you and really genuine, and is it compelling in the market?
So does that mean that you could retrofit a purpose, or does it mean that you actually had to have one in the first place?
I think you can retrofit, right? So very often purpose brands are, not always, but very often they are, because they come from the founder and they were really the basis for the founding of that company, right? And in that case, I think it's logical and it's easy, it's comfortable, it's natural, right? But that's not to say that, and I'd have to think about examples. None really come to mind. But that's not to say that purposes can't shift over time, or all of a sudden kind of be created. Maybe there's changes in the market or changes internally within a company's organization that cause a certain purpose to rise in importance and define a brand.
Oftentimes, I feel that purpose comes with life-changing moments.
Yeah,
and perhaps you can have that kind of let's say a life perspective changing moment within the organization. A new leader, let's say the CEO, who comes in and then says, well, you know what, times have changed, this is what's important. And then of course it comes down to the integrity and the authenticity of the way that leader leads it through. Last thing I wanted to talk about, Mitch, was about in the Indispensable Brand, your new book. You talk about employees are far and away the most important touch point for the brand, a point with which I agree wholeheartedly. In that case, is it not the biggest challenge is to find the right employees? So, I mean, you want to make the great brand, but then how do you find the adequate employees to make that brand come alive? Yeah, well, in the extreme case, especially for companies that are very brand led and brand centric, it actually becomes a part of how they recruit and acquire and retain employees. So especially for a corporate brand, and especially in B2B, here is our brand, and here, brands have values and brands have precepts. To what extent do you believe in these? Do you embrace them? Do you demonstrate them through your behavior and through your actions and accomplishments and so forth? So it actually becomes ingrained into their culture, right? The key aspects of the brand, or the key values that brand possesses. That's the ideal. But at a minimum, if for companies that can't go that far, at a minimum, it's important to train, right, and make sure that employees understand the brand, understand what the brand promise is, and not just in words, but in terms of actions. And what does this mean? What does this brand positioning mean in terms of how you conduct yourself on social media, or the content that you post, or the way you interact with customers, or the way you answer the phone in customer service? Make sure that they understand it and ideally embrace it and live it. Beautiful. So, Mitch, tell us how we can track you down, follow you, buy your book, The Indispensable Brand.
So the book is available, I would say, in two ways. One is it's in most online retailers' websites, so Amazon, Barnes & Noble, I can't speak globally as to what all the retailers are. I don't know all offhand, but most of the major online retailers around the world are offering it right now, so you can purchase it there. And you can also visit my company's website. So you mentioned my company earlier, FullSurge. So at FullSurge, FullSurge.com. There's a lot of information about the book on our website, as well as the ability to download 2 chapters for free if you'd like to read a little bit of a sample before you purchase. You can do that as well.
Nice. Well, it's a good long book, and so getting 2 chapters will not be everything, but it'll give you a good taste. I'll put the links in the show notes. And Mitch, pleasure to have you on the show. Great to have a Chicago native here, and look forward to staying in touch.
I would like that very much. Thank you, Minter. It was a pleasure speaking with you.
Thanks for having listened to this recording of the Minter Dialogue Show. You'll find the show notes and other blog posts on minterdial.com. If you enjoyed the show, please head over to iTunes to give a rating and review. And to finish, here's a song I wrote with Stephanie Singer, A Convinced Man.
A stranger tucked around me, precipitating the danger. To feel free, trust is the reason. Still, I won't toe the line. I sit here passively, hope for your respect, anticipating the thrill of your intellect. Maybe I tell myself there's no use in me lying. I'm a convinced man, building an urge. I'm a convinced man, to live and die submerged. A convinced man, in the arms of a woman. I'm a convinced man, challenge my fate. I'm a convinced man, competition's innate. A convinced man, in the arms of a woman. Despise revenges and struggle to see. Live for the challenge so life's not incomplete. What's wrong with challenge? I know soon we all die. I like the feel of a stranger tucked around me, precipitating the danger. To feel free, trust in my reason.